of different things, both for you individually and for you as you play on a team. So number one, increase fitness levels. Obviously, that's a given anytime you're doing any sort of physical activity, but participating in sport can also help you build bone density, which is really important through puberty and your adolescent period. Can help lower your blood pressure and reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, which is heart disease, both now and in the future. Can help with improved coordination. It actually helps improve your mood, so decreased levels of depression and anxiety. Helps you improve confidence, character, emotional well-being. There's decreased drug use in athletes, more positive body image. And then soccer in general, being a team sport, helps promote teamwork, overcoming adversity. So things like when you lose a soccer game and you have to bounce back and overcome that, those principles can be applied to your daily life. With school and other obstacles that arise. And then soccer is played internationally. So if you ever want to travel in the future, it's a universal language that you can get involved with other individuals. And the outdoor exposure is really important, especially as we get into our spring and summer season here in the Northeast. That sun exposure really helps with vitamin D levels as well. In terms of academic benefits that are associated with physical activity, so we know that moderate to vigorous physical activity as well as sport team participation are associated with higher GPAs and academic achievement. So that is a wonderful concept of being physically active and an athlete. NCAA athletes, so at the college level, our NCAA athletes actually have higher overall graduation rates than the general student population. And then women who play sport at least 3 or more times per week are 2 times as likely to have a degree than non-athletes. So that's fantastic as well. We're going to shift over to soccer-specific injuries in athletes. So to start with some general principles, as you can imagine in soccer, you're playing, you're running around, you're kicking the ball. So a lot of our injuries are from the waist down. So 75 to 87% of injuries are of the knee, ankle, and thigh. Important to note that a lot of these injuries actually happen during games or competition rather than training. And that's just because you're playing harder. You're going up against opponents. There's a lot more contact associated with competition and games. And then specific injuries include things like ankle sprains, a high ankle sprain, which is a little bit more serious of an injury, ACL tears and LCL sprains. So those are ligaments within the knee that help stabilize the knee. Meniscus are the cushioning within the knee, and so you can have injury to the meniscus. And then hamstring is that muscle on the back of the leg. There's a lot of hamstring strains or muscle pulls associated with soccer. And then as you can imagine, our goalies have a little different job. So goalies actually suffer from more upper extremity injuries. And so the AC joint is this little bump on top of your shoulder. It connects the clavicle, which is the bone that kind of runs from the neck to the shoulder to one of the shoulder bones. And so they can have an injury of that. The rotator cuff is the muscle in the shoulder, and they can have injuries to the shoulder. And then they can have things like elbow and shoulder joint instability as well. So in terms of comparing male versus female injuries in soccer, so this slide focuses on our males. Compared to females, males have an overall higher risk of sustaining an injury in general while playing soccer. They have higher rates of thigh or hamstring, so that muscle behind your leg strains, and they also have higher levels of cramps, both of the thigh and of the lower leg, so things like calf cramps. So it's really important for males to stay hydrated and get enough electrolytes. And then they also have higher rates of hip and groin injuries. And so these can be muscle pulls of the muscles on the inside of the legs, which are called the adductors, of the hip in general, and sometimes of the abdominal muscles, which come down and connect to the groin. Shifting over to our female athletes, compared to males, females have higher rates of ACL injuries. So the ACL is that stabilizing ligament in the knee. And these injuries can be pretty devastating for athletes. It can take them out of the game for 9 to 12 months, okay? And adolescent girls participating in sports like soccer that include a lot of pivoting and jumping actually have 4 to 6 times the rate of these injuries as compared to the male counterparts. They also have more problems of the knee in general, so tracking problems. So the patella is the kneecap, that bone that floats on top of the knee. And that I think of like a golf ball sitting on a tee. It can shift back and forth if it's not suited in the middle of the tee, and that can cause some irritation of the front of the knee. And that's something we call patellofemoral syndrome. And females have that more often than males. And then interestingly, there's been a lot of work around concussion lately in soccer and in sports in general, comparing males and females. And females actually have greater concussion rates per athletic exposure, more symptoms, and more time lost to concussions. So if we look at the graph on the right here, you can see that this is comparing girls and boys in similar sports. So we could put this in the context of soccer. And an athletic exposure is essentially anytime you go out on the field. So this could be practice, this could be games. And you can see here over the past, especially over the past 8 years, and this is a little outdated at this point, but the rate of concussions in females has really taken off as compared to males. There's also a greater prevalence of eating disorders and more bone stress injuries, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Again, I just want to show you some statistics on concussions. So overall, highest concussion rates, boys football is number 1, but you can see here that girls soccer is number 2. So 8.19 concussions per 10,000 athletic exposures. And again, that's anytime you go out on the field. Over here on the right, we can see a table comparing the incidence of females versus male concussion rates, okay? And so if we highlight the soccer one here, you can see that the rate of concussion in female soccer players is 2.33 times in competition that of males, and so much higher rates there. And then last word about concussions here, again, in our collegiate female athletes, you can see females in soccer 83% higher than their male counterparts. And then risk for prolonged symptoms. So when it comes to concussions, prolonged symptoms are anything longer than 3 weeks. We expect most concussions to resolve within that time. And you can see that female sex is a risk for prolonged symptoms. Females, interestingly, this was a study done at CHOP, so one of the children's hospitals in Pennsylvania. Females are more likely to report concussions to their athletic trainers and coaches, though they were later to present to their physicians. And when they intervened in this study and they got females into their physicians earlier, they actually returned to sport a lot quicker. So the important takeaway from that is get in and see your physician so we can get you back to sport quicker. And this slide is busy. There's a lot of words on it, but this is essentially explaining why females and males have different injuries, right? So why are we seeing more things in males and other things in females? And it basically comes down to anatomy. So a couple of key points here are that females have wider hips than males, okay? And that's just our anatomy at baseline. That's how we're born. And so when you draw a line from your hips to your knees, it often comes down in a V shape, which puts your knee in a more vulnerable position. There's also differences in the size of the ligaments in the knee themselves. And when we think about things like concussions, there's difference in how wide our neck is, how big our head is. And there's also a lot of studies going on and research going on right now into some of the neural connections in the brain itself and how those differ between females and males. So just a lot of differences in anatomy overall. I did want to touch on growth briefly because all of you are in a period of growth. And so on the left here, we see what looks like a growth chart. So when you go into your primary care physician or pediatrician every year, they track your growth. And we expect it to be on a straight line here. And some people are shorter and grow more along this line, and other people are taller and grow along this line. But you can see right in here that the slope of the line gets a little curvy and starts to change. And so what I've done on the right here is I've blown that up, and it's a little bit exaggerated, but this is what puberty looks like, okay? So you're growing along, but you're growing kind of at a slow rate. And then all of a sudden you hit this point and your growth really takes off. And that's your growth curve, okay? And then as you start to get to your adult height, that starts to plateau out here at the end. What happens when you grow is that your bones grow a lot faster than your muscles or your tendons. And so this is the thigh bone, the femur bone, and this is your tibia. So that's the lower leg. And this is a picture from the side. And then this is the muscle of the quadriceps. So that's the thigh muscle, and that comes down and attaches to the kneecap. And then that attaches to the bone via a tendon, okay? And so what happens is these bones are growing quicker than your muscle and tendon right here. And so as you can imagine, those things are getting stretched like a rubber band, right? They're getting stretched. And what do they want to do? They want to rebound back, okay? And so what can happen is you can get a lot of irritation or these injuries at this fancy place called an apophysis where the tendon attaches to the bone. This next slide's a little busy, but what this graph is showing us here is this is an adolescent who's growing along their growth curve, okay? And these two lines are that period where you have rapid growth throughout puberty. And on the left here, these are injuries, mostly of where those tendons attach to bone at different areas. So Sever's disease is at the ankle. That's where the Achilles attaches. Osgood-Schlatter is at the knee. It's the one I just showed you on the last slide. These guys right here are all at the hip. And then the spondy is of the back. It's a stress injury to the bones in the back. And as you can see, what we know as physicians are there's certain periods of your growth where you're more vulnerable to certain injuries. And so just growing throughout your adolescent period is a risk factor for certain types of injuries. So now the important question, how do we prevent injuries, right? We all want to stay on the field. We all want to be at every soccer game and play our best. One of the best ways in soccer that we know of to prevent knee injuries is FIFA 11 Plus. And I would imagine most of you have heard of this, but what this is, it's a combination of different warm-up exercises and about 15 different exercises that you can use to help prevent injuries. And our studies have shown that this can actually reduce injuries by up to 30%. And one of these studies was specifically in a group of Norwegian female soccer players. And they only did this 1.3 times per week. So not even 2 times per week reduced injury by that amount, okay? So that's huge. But the important thing with FIFA 11 Plus is that you know how to do the exercises appropriately and you have someone watching you, right? So you can see here, there's like a plank shown here on the left. If you're arching throughout your back, that can actually put more stress on your back and that can be bad for you instead of being helpful. So it's really important that you have someone like a coach who's really familiar with how to do these accurately, or a strength and conditioning specialist help go through these with you. And if you are coming back from injury, this is a really good time to focus on FIFA 11 Plus. And often you're in physical therapy, so you can have your physical therapist go through this with you and make sure you're doing these exercises correctly. Concussions, on the other hand, are pretty hard to prevent, okay? So concussions often occur not from overuse, but rather an acute injury. So maybe you're going to head the ball and you accidentally run into another player, okay? The one thing we know in soccer is that heading might be bad for you over time when you're young, okay? So when you're young and your brain is still developing, there's rules surrounding how often you should head the ball, okay? So 11U, you should not be heading the ball, and 12U and 13U in soccer, there's certain regulations around how often you should be heading the ball. Usually doesn't cause concussion from heading the ball, but what we know is if you head the ball too often when you're young, it might create an overuse problem where you are getting some repetitive damage to your brain or your head. And so it's really important to follow those guidelines. As you get a little older and your brain's more developed, we're less worried about that, okay? But it is important to recognize a concussion. And like I said earlier, get into your physician so we can get you back to sport quicker. And so symptoms associated with concussion include things like headache, confusion, feeling sick to your stomach. So you might feel nauseous. A lot of times you have difficulty concentrating, or maybe bright lights or sounds are really bothersome for you. You might have trouble sleeping. And so anytime you're hit in the head and you feel any of these symptoms, it's really important to report it to either an athletic trainer or a coach or someone who's nearby. Okay, so that's step number 2. You got to recognize it. You got to report it. Okay. And this is really important. So what happens, this is kind of one of those educational principles that applies to sport. An object in motion will stay in motion, okay? So here, this person, let's say this is another player's head, okay? Let's say this person went up to head the ball. Their skull, so the bone on the outside, stops against that other player, but the brain is actually kind of free floating. And so the brain keeps moving and you get this bruise on your head. One concussion is bad, but it's really important that you don't go back and play with a concussion because we're most worried about something called second hit syndrome, okay? And so if you get hit in the head a second time, that can actually be life-threatening. And that's why we get really concerned about concussions and want to make sure you're fully better before you return to sport, okay? And I don't want to scare you with that, but that's the reality of the situation. So the key principle here is when in doubt, sit it out. So if you're maybe not sure if you had a concussion, but you got hit in the head pretty hard and you're not feeling 100%, just sit that game out and go into your doctor and get checked out, okay? It's more important that you keep your head safe than you play in a single game. Some other things when it comes to injury prevention, we know that injuries are associated with sports specialization. And what does that mean? So if we go down to the bottom of this, this is a table of degree of specialization. If we look at highly specialized athletes, what does that mean? That means that athlete is training year-round in a single or more than 8 months per year in their sport. So if you're playing soccer more than 8 months of the year, you choose a single sport as your main sport. So if I ask you, what's your main sport? You would nice and quickly answer soccer, and then you're quitting all other sports to focus on one sport. So if you have 3 of these, you're a very highly specialized athlete. And what we know is that your risk of injury and overuse injury go up if you're a specialized athlete. And that's okay. Some of us will be specialized athletes, and that's okay. But there's some principles we can do to reduce injury. And number one, especially if you're 16 years of age or younger, you should train less hours per week than your age, okay? All of these things just to help reduce injury. So if you're not meeting all of them, it's okay, but principles to keep in mind to help reduce injury. So if you're 12, you shouldn't really be training in soccer more than 12 hours per week. Number 2 is that looking at what we call the sports training ratio. So this is organized sports, so things like soccer, to what we call free play. So free play, if you're really young, could be like going out to recess. If you're older, it could be a pickup basketball game with your friends, things like that. And so if this ratio of sports to free play is less than 2 to 1, we know that reduces your risk of injury. And the last principle, like I said, injury risk is increased during competition. So if we compare how often we're competing or playing in games to how often we're training, if that ratio is less than 1 to 1, then that can help reduce our risk of injury. So training helps prepare us the best we can for competition. So we want to make sure we're training more than we're competing. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to touch on here is something called relative energy deficiency in sport. And Laura's going to talk about it a little bit more. It used to be called the female athlete triad. We got rid of that name for a couple of reasons. Number 1, this happens in males and females. So horrible name, right? And number 2, triad, we used to think this only affected 3 parts of the body. And now we know it affects a lot of different parts of the body. And this is a mismatch between the energy you take in from food and how much energy you're using throughout your day and for sport. And so what we want to see is that your energy intake is greater than the energy you're expending through sport, okay? But if this goes the opposite way, if you are not taking in enough energy for everything you're doing, it can start to affect both your health and performance. And it can affect all kinds of things with your health. So if you're a female, menstrual function, once you start to have a period, we want to see that you're having a period every single month. And the first year of having your menstrual cycle can be atypical. So if you start your cycle at 13 and it's not regular every month until the age of 14, that's okay. But once you reach 14, we would want to make sure you're having a regular cycle every single month. And if you're not, that's a really important thing to bring up to your physician, okay? It can affect your bone health, so put you more at risk for fractures. It can affect your blood levels, so you can get things like anemia, which causes fatigue. It can affect your growth. So if you're male, let's say maybe you're supposed to be 5'9", maybe you only end up being 5'7" because of this, okay? It can affect your heart. It can affect how you digest food. So all different kinds of things. However, you guys usually care more about how it affects your sport, right? And this is really a take-home message. We want to make sure we're getting enough energy because otherwise it can cause increased injury risk, can cause decreased training response. So what does that mean? Let's say you're going and you're trying to get faster and you're running every single day and instead you're getting slower. This can be a sign that maybe you're not getting enough energy from food. Okay, it can change your judgment and your concentration. So how does that affect soccer? Maybe you're not making the best in-game decisions of when to pass a ball versus when to shoot a ball. It can affect your muscle strength. So all sorts of things. And I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time, but I'm just going to make the mention that this is when you're developing the most bone density that you're going to have throughout your life. So your bone health, most of that is set by the age of 18 and in males up to the age of 24. And so really what we're doing with energy intake during these periods of your life really matter. And then my last piece here, what to do after injury. So a couple things, listen to your physician, okay? You guys always want to get back to soccer sooner than we let you. And I swear there's a method to our madness, okay? So sometimes we're kind of pulling you back and say, we're not quite there. Let's make sure we go through physical therapy and check off everything on the list before we get you back. And there's a reason for that. So make sure you listen to your physician. Number 2 is make sure you're doing your physical therapy and your home exercises. So a lot of times people are going to physical therapy, but not doing their homework they're assigned. Those exercises are really important, A, to help you come back stronger, but B, also to help prevent recurrent injury. There's really good research in things like ankle springs that you lose your sense of where your body is in space, and physical therapy helps you regain that. So these are things you don't notice. It's not like, oh my gosh, I can't feel where my ankle is. But if you were to start to tweak your ankle, your body doesn't respond quite as quickly if you've had an injury. And so once you do your physical therapy, your body relearns to recognize those cues. And then number 3, we talk about something called athletic identity. Okay. So if I were to ask a lot of you, who are you? A lot of you would reply, I'm a soccer player, which is awesome. We love athletes. That's what we do. That's what Laura and I, who we are and the patients we see every single day. However, a lot of you are also good friends to other people. Maybe you're a sister or a brother, you're a daughter or a son, maybe you're a musician, or you're talented in other ways. And so recently we were at a conference with an Olympian, and he said, struggle creates growth, okay? And every injury is a period of struggle, and we want to see how you can grow throughout that. And part of that is making sure you focus on some of these other aspects of your identity. And then lastly, a couple of things, since a lot of our injuries we know happen from the waist down, how do you know you're ready to return to play, right? So number 1, you're not having pain when you're walking around. So a lot of people, you sprain your ankle or you pull a hamstring, that's going to hurt when you're just walking around. So number 1 is we want to see pain-free walking around in day-to-day life. And then number 2, we're going to take you through what's called a return to sport progression. Okay. And so what that looks like is maybe we say, okay, today you can do some soccer drills on your own at home, not at practice. Okay. And then once you do that for a couple of days, maybe we let you go to soccer and do the drills, but you're not playing in scrimmages or running around yet. You're just sticking to the drills. Day number 3, or a couple days later, maybe we let you get back to scrimmages, but you're non-contact, okay? And then maybe day 4, we add in contact, and maybe day 5, we let you get back to games. Sometimes that's a quick 5-day thing. Sometimes that's a couple of week thing. Sometimes it takes us a month to get you back to sport, but we'll help guide that process. And then I think I can't overemphasize how important it is that you feel mentally ready to go back to sport. Okay. We know if you don't feel mentally confident in your body or your injury that it's fully recovered, we know you're at increased risk for repeat injury. Okay. And so this is usually a signal that you're not quite ready, or if it's just that mentally you're struggling with it, we know plenty of people who can help you through that. Okay. So that's really, really important as well. All right, I'm going to hand this off to Laura to talk about nutrition.
Thank you, Dr. Schley. Just give me one moment, everybody, to share my screen with you all. All right. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Thank you for having us here. Soccer was my main sport growing up, so I am always completely jazzed to talk to soccer players. So shout out to all my offensive center mids out there. But yeah, I'm here to help you prevent those injuries, help you get back out there. And nutrition is such a key component of that. So hopefully you can get some good takeaways tonight. So let's get rolling here. I had to start out with a picture of the OG Miss Mia Hamm. So I played soccer, gosh, it was just a few years ago now. So Mia was really the one that like we all idolized, really looked up to her. And she really, I think, kind of put women's soccer on the map too. So you'll see sprinkled throughout my presentation tonight, there are a few of my favorite male and female US and international players. So, you know, there will be prizes if you can identify all of them. Just kidding. Maybe. So let's talk about the importance of fueling. And I always say fueling instead of eating, right? Your body is like a car. So I will use that analogy tonight to talk about filling up the gas tank, performing well. So you'll hear that a few times through my presentation. So if we were all sitting in a room, I would ask you, who has goals for themselves for this upcoming season? And I am sure every single one of you would raise your hand. So performance goals require adequate and appropriate fueling. Dr. Schley just spoke a lot about growing and developing bodies. So adolescents, teenagers, bodies are still growing and developing, so many parts of you. So fueling, really important for that. You're training multiple times a week, sometimes daily. Sometimes I remember when I played club, I had one track practice in the afternoon, and then I was going to my club practice at night and trying to really like stay on top and fuel. This was way before I was a dietitian, but trying to stay on top of my energy needs because they were so great, especially on some of those days. Tournament days can be tricky, and I'm going to talk to you about that. And then the bone and muscular development, again, a lot of what I say is going to echo what Dr. Schley said, so I won't go into great detail since she already spoke about it. And of course, because of all these things and because of the high energy output, athletes, soccer players, you're going to be more susceptible to falling to that energy deficit, right? So expending more than you are taking in. So I'm going to teach you some tips and tricks on how to avoid that. So unique considerations for soccer players. Soccer is a sport where you have short, intense bursts of speed, right? And then you have moderate, intense exercise. Maybe you're sort of jogging around the field, but then, you know, there's a long ball, you're picking it up, you're going, right? Someone's making a run, you're the defender. So you're using a lot of different energy systems in the body. And then maybe there's periods where you're a little bit more at rest. So that's really making your body work. And it's dipping into all these different energy stores that you're going to have in your body. So I'm going to talk about each of those, how your body uses carbohydrates, how your body uses protein, and how your body uses fats. The key takeaway being your body's going to use all of those things. Excuse me. So players can cover 5 to 7, oops, my thing is wrong, but or more, right? 5 to 7 miles or even more during a game. It can be dependent on your position, but there's a lot of running. It's a very aerobic sport. And a soccer player can burn well over 1,000 calories in a game. I think a lot of people, I don't talk about numbers and calories a lot, but I do like to throw that out there that like you are burning a ton of energy in a game and a lot of times in your practices as well. So let's build a plate. Don't eat a soccer ball. It won't digest well. Okay. Unless that's like a cake that looks like one. Anyway. All right. Got one of our gals here. We got Carly Lloyd. I gave that one away. So let's talk about carbs, everybody. So carbohydrates are the fastest and most readily available energy source in the body. They're what your body wants to grab first, especially when you're in what we call like an aerobic sport. So soccer, again, you need a big aerobic base for it, lots of running around, right? So carbohydrates are that's the preferred energy source. So carbohydrates in food break down to what we call glucose. And I say glucose, it's a sugar. It is like the gasoline for your body to go. So if a body is low in carbohydrate, it can actually start to use muscle for fuel. So if someone's like not eating carbs, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, there's a lot of risks, but one of them is you start to feel like you're hitting a wall, right? Like you're sort of falling off. Your body then starts to say, I got to make glucose. I got to make sugar from somewhere so it can actually use your muscle fibers and create that energy. So that's a really negative consequence, right? And then just some examples. So some examples of carbohydrates, right? Pasta, fruit has carbohydrates, bread, oatmeal, cracker, pretzel, granola bars that are like oat based. So there are a lot of them out there. So there's two different types of carbohydrates. No, not good and bad. I don't believe in those words when it comes to food, but there are different carbohydrates that digest in different ways. So slower digesting carbohydrates are those that include fiber as well as protein in them. So these are more of like our whole wheat, whole grain foods, like whole wheat pastas, brown rice, beans, cereals that are whole grain, oatmeal. And we like to see these. Everything you eat in your diet does not need to be whole wheat. Okay, that's a fallacy. But we like to aim for about half. So if you're like, I will never eat brown rice, okay, fine. But maybe you'll be okay with a little bit of whole wheat bread, right? So these are good to include in the diet. They help you feel fuller a little bit longer. Fiber is our friend, helps keep us regular with digestion. So these have a lot of benefits. But guess what? If you have slow digesting, you also have fast digesting carbohydrates. These have little to no fiber. These give you a boost of like immediate energy. And so my picture over there of honey, honey is a fast digesting carbohydrate. These carbohydrates are best right before practice, at halftime, throughout a game. And there is some implication actually in recovery for a faster digesting carbohydrate, which again, stay tuned. That's a little preview for a slide coming. But some examples of this, of fast digesting carbs, just to name a few, white rice, certain energy bars or granola bars, like a Nature Valley bar or a Cliff bar. There's a little bit of fiber in there, but not enough that I would call it like a whole grain food. Pretzels are a great one. They give you some salt too, so you get some electrolyte. Gatorade. I'm going to talk more about sports drinks, but a sport drink provides you with carbohydrate to be used during sport to help replenish those energy stores. So especially on a hot day, extreme temperature, a tournament day, something like a sport drink can actually be really, really helpful. So not using like a diet one. I'm a non-diet dietitian anyway, so I really don't ever recommend like diety foods, but you want the sugar in a Gatorade is helping to replenish your muscles, so it's helping with performance. So we're coming back to that. But just again, a little nugget of knowledge there for you. Okay, protein. So protein is very helpful for building muscle, repairing tissues. We do not want to use it as an energy source when we're training, right? Because I said that before. We don't want to break down muscle, right? Protein has a lot of roles in the body, so we want to let it do its thing and not use it to burn, to be burned for energy. So these are large nutrients that are made up of smaller amino acids. So some of you may have learned about those in science class, right? Again, muscle development, growth, strength. These also help keep you fuller and more satisfied after a meal. So if you have a really low protein meal, you might notice that you're getting hungry very quickly afterwards. And athletes definitely have a higher need for protein, just like they do for carbohydrates, because you're breaking down more muscle. You're putting more strain on it. We want to build it up and get stronger. So protein, really important. It can vary sport to sport. But soccer players definitely have an increased need, and I'm going to tell you what that looks like. But things like chicken, beef, eggs, beans, legumes like lentils, dairy products, or, for those that don't eat meat, your tofu, tempeh, seitan, things like that are also going to be protein sources. So just to give you guys a little bit of a clue into how much protein is in certain foods. I always give, again, I don't speak in numbers often, but I like to give a recommendation of consuming around 20 grams ballpark of protein at a meal. So if you're having something like, we'll go with the first one, like a chicken breast, 3.5 ounces is a little bigger than a palm. Okay, all our palms are different. Again, we're not being exact. You do not need to weigh something or measure it. In fact, I would completely discourage something like that. But again, sort of ballparking a visual, that would give you about 25 grams of protein. An egg has about 7. So if you're making an egg and cheese sandwich and you're using an egg and a piece of cheese, you're getting close to that 20, right? If you throw a glass of milk with it or a glass of soy milk, you're going to boost it up further. Fun fact, almond milk, oat milk, which I didn't put on here, very, very, very low protein. So if you do not tolerate dairy, A lactose-free milk, such as a Lactaid or a soy milk, is what I would recommend because the amount of protein matches the amount of protein in cow's milk, which is about 8 grams in a cup. So this is just a little something to kind of fill you in on how much protein is in foods. But again, you want to be thinking about protein at every meal, and there should be a little bit of protein at your snacks as well. Okay. And last but not least, fats. These are, so remember I said before, you don't want to use protein for fuel. Your body actually burns a combination of carbohydrate and fat when you are training. So fat is what we call a slow energy source. So when you are out there and you're running really fast and you need energy quick, your body's going to carbohydrate. When you're in a little bit more of those, like what we might say, like conversational, if you were jogging and like you could have a chat with your friend next to you, your body's burning a little bit more fat, still using carb, but again, it uses fat and carbohydrate. So fats are an energy source, but let's just be honest, fats are awesome and they give our food flavor. So they also help keep us fuller and satisfied longer. So if you're eating a meal that does not have enough protein and does not have enough fat, you're going to get hungry really quickly. So it's really helpful. Again, it can't work alone. It needs a carbohydrate. They play best as best friends. They help us absorb vitamins like vitamin D, which is important for bone health. And I'll talk more about that. Also helps with immune health, keeping your immune system strong. Hormone production. So again, those testosterone, estrogen, they both need fat in the diet to help with production. They're also helpful for inflammation, things like omega-3s that you find in things like your chia seeds or flax seeds or salmon or walnuts. There we go. All those things are going to have some anti-inflammatory properties, which are great. So my picture has some examples, but also let's not forget about yummy things like butter and things like that. Those are also perfectly fine to include in the diet. Okay. This is one of my absolute favorite tools to use with athletes. So everything I just talked about with putting a plate together, these two plates, they come from the U.S. Olympic sports dietitians. They've used these. They've actually tested them. They're evidence-based. They've used them in the dining halls at the Olympic training facilities. So these are a way to think about, okay, Laura said I need carbs. Laura said I need protein. But like, what does that look like on a plate? So the plate on the left, the gray plate, that is what we call like your moderate training plate. So if you notice the difference between the gray and the red plate is the grain or the carbohydrate section, right? So the moderate training plate, I would say that's for like an hour to 2 hours of exercise a day. You should be having at least, you can always have more, okay? But at least a third of your plate should be coming from those carbohydrates. When you have 2 hours, plus a tournament day, at least half of your meal. And I always caveat this by saying, if you're eating pasta, it's going to be your whole plate. Like, please do not think you can only eat half. I would never, I'm an Italian girl. Like I would never eat just half a plate of pasta. That's like a sin in my house. So anyway, it's going to give that energy. But the whole principle behind these plates is that the more activity that you're doing, remember, carbohydrates go up, up, up. So when I'm working with an athlete that's increasing their volume, that is the number one food group that I am increasing in the diet. Okay. So planting that seed, thinking about tournament days, tournament weekends, soccer camp days, like preseason for my high school athletes, you have longer days, you need more carbs. Okay. And the vegetables sometimes have to come down a little bit in their portion in order to accommodate for more carbohydrates. You might need to also use that red plate. You guys are growing again. So this doesn't mean like, oh, I can't eat half my meal from carbohydrate if I don't have a tournament. No. If you're also like, carbohydrates are needed for growth. So again, I think a balanced plate with all the food groups represented, but a red plate is often used for growing athletes as well. So these can be just kind of something you can think of, you can refer back to, but I want you also to notice that all the food groups, fat is assumed to be mixed in. It doesn't have like its own section, but like it's mixed on in there, right? Dressings, olive oils, butter, kind of in the plate. But all the food groups are represented on the plate. None of them are missing. Okay. All right. Better know who this guy is. Amazing soccer player. Probably one of the greatest of all time. Okay, we'll come back to who he was if you don't know. But okay, so this is one of the most popular questions that I get, thinking about timing. So this very visual representation, if you look all the way to the right and you see exercise time, right? That's a time of your practice, that's a time of your game. You can use this graph for really like practice or a game at any time, because the closer you get to a practice or a game, I want you to be focusing on carbohydrates. And remember, we talked about a few slides ago, fast digesting carbohydrates. The closer you get, you want something easily digested. So something like, let's say your practice is at, 3 o'clock after school. You will have had a beautifully balanced lunch, now that you've listened to my lecture, at, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever it is, a few hours out, right? Look, 3 to 4 hours out, balanced plate, carbs, proteins, fats. The closer you get to practice, oops, it's 30 minutes before I'm hitting the field. I'm going to grab some pretzels. I'm going to grab a Nature Valley bar. I'm going to grab some dry cereal that's not fiber one, lower fiber, right? Cheerios, a piece of fruit, maybe Cheerios and a banana or something like that, because that's going to give you that quick energy. You don't want a load of protein and fat before you work out. It's going to sit like a ton of bricks. Okay. So you can use this sort of spectrum to think about, how far out am I from my game, my practice, and what should my food group look like? Okay. But if it's a game first thing in the morning, I want you getting up, maybe a little earlier, and having that breakfast. We are not skipping breakfast ever, by the way. So really, really important. But this is something I think everybody can use for, depending on what time the game or practice is, to refer back to this. So please feel free to take a picture. It's a very old archaic diagram, but it gets the point across. Recovery nutrition. So within about 30 to 45 minutes post game or practice, you want to have a meal or a snack that is a balance of carbohydrates and protein. So not just protein, you also want carbs to replenish your muscle. So again, if we were in a room, I would be like, how many people have ever heard of chocolate milk as a great recovery beverage? And like half the room would be like, oh yeah. And then have the parents would be like, really? You're telling my kid to eat chocolate? Like, why? Because the chocolate, a little extra sugar in the milk, helps your muscles recover carbohydrate stores more rapidly. So if you're finishing practice and you're not going home and having dinner right away, or you have I remember where my club team practiced, it was a regional team, right? Like a lot of you guys planned. It was like, I drove over an hour to go to practice some nights. So I would in the car be drinking a chocolate milk or having like peanut butter crackers or peanut butter filled pretzels, or like my jam. Love those things. Protein and carbs together. They're a beautiful thing. So then I would get home and have my dinner, but I didn't want to miss that recovery window. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example. Focus on the 3 R's. So refuel, repair, and replenish. That's something to think about with recovery fueling. Okay. We want to get those muscles ready to rock and roll again the next day. So again, this is a slide. Feel free to take a little screenshot or a picture, but these are some ideas for pre and post workout fueling. Now, granted, I know everybody's going, Laura, you just said eat just carbs like before a workout. So some of these, if they have like nuts or peanut butter, you might want to have those like if you have like a little more time to digest, but you can just drop the protein part off of the snack if it's closer. And again, every body is different. So what you want to do is practice on your practice days. See what feels good for you, what digests the best. Like, oh man, I had that Cliff Bar and like my energy felt really good. It digested really well. So like, sweet, I'm going to remember that that's a good snack for me. I'm going to bring that to my tournaments. I'm going to keep that in my soccer bag. And you know how your body reacts to things, right? You don't want to try something new on a game day. And then all of a sudden you're out there and you're like, oh boy, that didn't sit so well, right? Like that's not when we want to find out something didn't go well, right? And again, that post-workout, I just gave you some different ideas there, but the main idea being combination protein carbohydrate in that 30 to 45 minutes, up to 45 minutes after practice. All right. So fueling for a tournament. As I mentioned, I would touch on this. So thinking about this, like when you're playing a tournament, you are again expending more activity, right? So you are going to be burning more energy, especially those carbohydrates too, right? More of those. So I always think about, you do not want to overload your body the night before with like this gigundo bowl of pasta. It can actually make you feel kind of sick in the morning, but you want to be, I like increasing the carbohydrates actually throughout the day before a tournament. So I do say, add like an extra scoop of rice to dinner, an extra scoop of pasta, or, a baguette with, butter, olive oil. But you can think about that plate I showed you before and make sure that like at least half of your plate, if not more, is coming from those carbohydrate rich meals. Okay. So the key being increase the carbohydrate, hydration too. I didn't mention that on this slide, but hydration, if you're playing in the heat. I remember we used to go down to Christmas time. We used to play a tournament down in Fort Lauderdale. I remember playing one day. We had 3 games scheduled. I think our parents all thought we were fully nuts at this point, that our coaches were nuts for letting us play, but we did. We had it was 90% humidity and it was in the 90s. So they gave us extra water breaks, but lots of electrolytes, lots of fluid. So I started that the day before so that I was really ready. And again, using electrolytes can be helpful with that fluid balance, so not just water. So I already kind of talked about this with the previous slide, but making sure you're still having a balanced meal 2 to 3 hours out from the game, 3 or even 4, but then having that carbohydrate rich snack as you get closer to go time. Okay. All right. So Dr. Schley really went over this section already. So I just put it in here for reinforcement, but we already talked about the balance. In the words of Mr. Miyagi, you got to find a balance, right? So you want to make sure, again, everything I'm talking to you about, you're having more calories in than you're burning through your energy expenditures. So Dr. Schley already went through these again, but just reinforcing an energy deficit can lead to a lot of physiological effects, but also negative performance effects. So nutrition is really, really, really the key. That's why Dr. Schley and I work so closely together, because the nutrition, I got news for you guys, nutrition is a secret weapon. So it really can make or break you. So what can get in the way of getting enough food? TikTok. It's like the bane of my existence. Anyway, TikTok trends. We know that. What I eat in a day. You guys heard of that one? Yeah, that is convincing people to undereat. And also, my meals aren't perfect. I have a master's degree in nutrition. I'm a sports dietitian. I've worked with some pretty big darn athletes, and you guys would know my meals aren't perfect and beautiful and Instagram worthy. So you want to follow what I eat in a day, you're welcome to, but you're probably going to be quite surprised that it doesn't look Instagram perfect, right? Whatever celebrity is promoting, what a professional athlete is promoting, social pressures. What are all your friends doing? What are people at school talking about? Plant-based eating gone wrong, people adopting vegan diets. That's been one that's a big area of concern. It's a really tricky one. I actually usually steer my adolescents away from a vegan diet at this age, just because it can be tricky unless you're really, really focused on it and you have a lot of support to do it properly, right? Vegetarian diets, a lot easier to navigate. And I know there are definitely, for religious reasons, a lot of people follow vegetarian diets. Those can totally work with, but if you have questions about it, that's what registered dietitians are here for. But again, plant-based eating gone wrong is really what I'm focusing on, and under fueling. Eating disorders or disordered eating, that's something we also specialize in treating in the athlete population in our clinic. Love this one. I'm not hungry. I didn't have time. Planning ahead, right? Prior proper planning. So no excuses there. And supplements. I know that people are often targeted also on social media for supplements to replace things, to replace food. Supplements are not a replacement from food. I'm going to say that again. Supplements are not a replacement for food. So, and they're really dangerous, and 99% of them, if not 100%, are not tested in adolescents or teenagers. So there's more risk. And I find my males are bigger users of the supplements. You can get everything you need from real food. And females, you tend to get targeted more for the weight loss supplements, the fat burners, they are dangerous, 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 dangerous. If you have questions about these, if you have concerns about them, come on in and see me. I have people come in and bring in bags of stuff and we go through it. And I'm like, we can do it with real food. And I can also help you learn how to fuel your body with real food. So this was just I did a search of the fad diets on trends on TikTok. Number one was the keto diet. Again, I've talked for if you guys haven't taken away from this, that carbohydrates are important. We might need to go get those ears checked, right? So, Calorie counting, I don't recommend that either. Again, I like the plate method. I like thinking of plate construction. Low carb diet, again, not appropriate. Vegan diet, really tricky, really tricky. Again, in an adolescent population. Vegetarian, again, perfectly fine. We just want to make sure you're hitting all the marks, but vegetarian diets, you can certainly, that's very workable. Gluten-free, unless you have celiac disease or you've been told that you don't digest gluten, there is zero, do you hear me? Zero performance benefit to cutting it out. Okay. I've given entire talks on these things, by the way. So come on in my office. I love talking about this stuff. So intuitive eating, yes, that is a thing, but it's being twisted into a diet trend. But that's a whole talk within itself. Holistic health, we got to be careful with some of that. Like, I'm all about eating whole foods and putting good things in our bodies. But like, I think a lot of things we see on social media take it to an extreme, right? I'm a dietitian. Again, I do this for a living. I eat fried foods. I eat sweets. I love ice cream, right? It's not all I eat, but I also love kale. I love Brussels sprouts. You're welcome, parents, for that one, but I do. So it's all about balance, right? So any of these things, the dairy free can be really risky because again, we need the dairy or fortified non-dairy for bone health. So let's talk for 1 second about intermittent fasting. This is a big one. So I just wanted to pull this one out. Really risky, really dangerous. It is a fad diet. Why is it a fad diet? Because all of these diets, they don't work. Okay. Some people might be like, well, it worked. Yeah. Worked short term, not going to work long term. Usually rebounds to causing a lot of people fall into binge eating or overeating as a result of being on a restricted diet or a time restricted diet. It can also increase your cortisol levels, which are your stress hormone, which can lead to increased food cravings, which can lead to binging. Again, overeating and binge eating, common side effects. People who go through, a lot of people report feelings of fatigue, disrupted sleep patterns, and there can be a negative impact on your neurotransmitters, your dopamine and serotonin. Those are our nice, calming neurotransmitters. We like these guys. So if these are getting thrown off, we can see an increase in anxiety as well as depression. So it can actually affect that. Irritability, and again, low energy availability. If we're restricting when we can eat in a day, it can be dangerous. So really, again, for adolescents, especially athletes, really, I would steer you away from any sort of dieting. Again, if you're feeling like you want to go in this direction, I would encourage you to come on in and talk to an RD about it. Here's my philosophy. All foods fit. No good foods or bad foods. It's all about balance and timing, right? I'm probably not going to recommend you go eat like a cupcake right before you play soccer. That might not sit so well. Yeah, you want to have one later, a little celebration, a little something after dinner. Sweet, go for it, right? If you come in and you're like, oh, Laura says all foods fit, I'm just going to eat, Fun Dip all the time, right? Is that even still a thing? I don't even know. But like sugar all the time, like, no, I'm probably not going to recommend that either. But there is a striking a balance, right? So there's no need to cut out food groups unless you have an allergy or a food intolerance, or I should also add a religious observance. But getting enough food is the most important thing. So, oh, I'm going to cut out sugar because it's going to help me perform well. I cannot tell you how many athletes I've treated for REDS because they cut out sugar, but didn't really understand what that meant, right? So really slippery slope. And I should just add as a caveat too, that when I was talking about intermittent fasting, I'm talking about fasting as a diet fad. I want to be mindful that we are observing Ramadan is occurring right now. So we might have some athletes that are observing Ramadan, and that is a religious observance. So I am not pointing a finger at those individuals. I think if someone is observing Ramadan, you want to just talk to your coach and make sure they're aware of that. You want to hydrate very well after a fast, and you want to have nice calorie dense, energy dense foods when you are eating to try and make up some of that nutrition. But you do want to sort of let a coach be aware, parents let a coach know, because we want to just make sure you're being safe. But there are plenty of professional athletes that do continue to train and compete when they are observing Ramadan. So, all right. Well, Dr. Schley, really ready. And this guy, his name's on his jersey, but he's the man. So calcium and vitamin D, this is, Dr. Schley kind of spoke about this already, but 3 servings of dairy is the goal. Vitamin D, I would say get your labs tested. If you're low, then we supplement. But calcium, vitamin D, really, really important in the diet for bone health. Oh yeah, can't skip by Harry. And I will just, again, because in the interest of time, just say that like electrolytes, helpful to hold water, maintain that balance in the body with fluid. Typically, they're recommended when an activity is 60 minutes or longer or extreme weather temperatures. But if you have trouble eating before practice, a sport drink can actually be really helpful to get some sugar in, or before a game. If you need something right before and you feel like you can't eat, you can use a liquid. Stay nice and hydrated. We want that urine in the top 3 of that chart, not at the bottom, right? That's a quick and easy way to tell if you are hydrated. Don't worry too much about those guidelines. And those are just some takeaway tips. I've already hit a lot of these things, so I'll go through that. Dr. Schley, did you want to go? There's just these 2 slides. I don't know if you wanted to hit them, or we should just go to questions.
No, let's just go to questions.
Okay. All right.
Sure.
And we can't forget to shout out our Female Athlete Conference that's happening this June 14th through 16th at the Seaport Hotel in Boston. Prices go up April 1st. So if you're interested in attending, parents, coaches, athletes, it's going to be phenomenal. And you get to meet me and Dr. Schley in person. So that's worth it, I think. But anyway, I'm sorry we ran a little bit long, but I'm happy to still, we're happy to still take some questions. Unless we answered everything.
I'm not seeing any come in the chat, but we'll give it another minute or 2.
Sure.
I do want to thank you both for your time today. I think this was extremely beneficial, and I hope all of you that joined in was able to gain something from it. Someone just said, what was the slide about sports drinks? Are you able to go back to that slide?
Sure. Yeah, we can go back. Let's do it. Yeah, we have a little time. So, all right. Whoops. Let me go back. Yep. Okay. So sport drink. Whoops. There it is. Okay. Let me just move this out of the way. So with the sport drinks, I did give some sort of time guidelines here, but basically, instead of just drinking water, if you're just drinking water, again, in that sort of typically that's 60 or greater, 60 to 90 minutes. Like I always brought a bottle of Gatorade and a bottle of water to practice with me. I probably wouldn't finish both of them. But yeah, replacing those electrolytes, which are in a sport drink, that's a pre-formulated one. These can be really, really helpful. They again can also provide those carbohydrates before or during a game to help keep your muscles energized, right? To help provide what they need to burn fuel. So if you look at around the bottle there before training, that's more about just regular, that could just be water too. That's not just specific to sport drinks. So 16 to 20 ounces, 2 hours before training. This is more just straight fluid. We're talking water here. Before training, 8 to 12 ounces of water. So again, just like a cup, a little bit more than a cup. And then when you are training, grabbing, a swig or 2 every 15 to 20 minutes, or when your coaches are, when you're allowed, but hopefully I'm sure they're giving you water breaks. And 1 squirt of a water bottle is about 1 ounce for reference. And then afterwards, rehydrating with about 16 to 20 ounces. But that can also come in the form of smoothie. Maybe it's like a fruit smoothie with some milk in it. It could be a sport drink, chocolate milk, which I already talked about. I'm actually going to loop a question in here that I see about the protein powder and shake, because it kind of, and then I see the egg question. So I'll get to that too. So the protein powders. So protein powder, it's not a necessary thing. Like you can get adequate protein from the diet without adding a protein powder in. That being said, like if you really struggle with like protein sources that you like, or getting them like quickly and easily, a scoop of protein powder is typically 10 to 20 grams. And I recommend whey is the best for muscle recovery. If you can't tolerate whey, then pea protein is the second best. But those things are providing you with amino acids. You get leucine is the number one amino acid, and that's naturally occurring in dairy products. So you can certainly use a protein powder. You can put it in a smoothie, or sometimes if breakfast is really hard, I'll have people do a protein shake with some fruit and maybe grab a granola bar or something like that. But you're getting in that protein then. But you can get it from real food. You can get it from real food as well. But yeah, you can do a protein powder. You just want to make sure, especially if like when you're going, like, let's say you're going to play in college, you will need to just double check to see that if you are using a protein powder, that it's like, it's NSF certified. So protein powders, you want to make sure they're not contaminated with anything, because the supplement industry is very, they don't test things before they go on the shelves. They can only pull a product if there's a problem. So you want to keep it really simple. I like a brand called BiPro. It's really simple, clean. It has like 2 or 3 ingredients, and it's NSF safe for sport. So I answered that one. I'll answer one more, and then Dr. Schley, I can pass it to you. So this is a quickie for me. I don't like eggs. What can I have for breakfast? So peanut butter is like, I worship peanut butter in my house. I make oatmeal with peanut butter and milk, or nuts on top, like almost every day. A bagel with peanut butter sandwich. If you don't like peanut butter, you can have a turkey sandwich for breakfast. You can have a bowl of leftover pasta and chicken. It doesn't have to be a breakfast food. You want to think more about getting all your macronutrients in there, so your proteins, carbs, and fats, but don't feel limited by it needing to be a breakfast food. Okay. So it could be eggs. I never eat eggs during the week because I never have time. So think outside the box. And again, it doesn't have to be a breakfast food. So that's a good tip for everybody. Dr. Schley, why don't I let you answer? Because I know there's a lot of nutrition questions coming in, but I want to make sure I don't want to go totally out of order.
Good. I think there's 2 here. So can I talk a little bit more about Osgood-Schlatter, and will it go away with proper strengthening and stretching, or is it something that you deal with until you stop growing? So great question. Osgood-Schlatter, that's tricky because both things can be true. Okay. So that's, as I showed on that, I showed that graph where you're most susceptible for specific injuries at certain times of your growth. So there is, for some people, this can wax and wane, meaning it can get better and it can get worse as you grow. It certainly will go away when you stop growing, but some people can do physical therapy, strengthening. A lot of this is stretching and stretching your hamstrings, so the back of your legs, to help with that. So some people do physical therapy and they treat it and it goes away and it kind of never recurs. Other people, this can kind of come and go until they're done growing. So it can be really tricky and it can be bothersome. My number one piece of advice for Osgood-Schlatter is, if you're having flares of pain, is to manage your workload. Okay. So maybe you go to practice generally 4 days a week. Maybe instead you go to practice 2 days a week and you go and sit on the sidelines and do your physical therapy exercises the other 2 days of the week if you're having a flare up. So it's not something where you have to totally ever stop your sport, but it's more about managing total hours per week. So hope that's helpful. And there's certainly lots of things we can do to help symptoms, like Voltaren gel, which is an anti-inflammatory gel. There's bands you can wear on your things and your knees. Those are like the tennis elbow straps. They're called choke pad straps. So lots of things we can do to help manage symptoms to keep you in the game, even if you're having Osgood-Schlatter. Let's see. The next one here is the question in regards to hours per week based on age. So if someone's 10 years old, they really should not be doing a single sport. So they shouldn't be doing more than 10 hours of soccer per week if we want to minimize injury risk. Do plenty of 10-year-olds play more than 10 hours a week? Certainly they do. And I feel like we're getting into this kind of period where everyone's trying to keep up with their neighbors. And now we have kids at 10 on, they're on their school teams, they're on a club team, they're maybe on a town team. So maybe they're on 3 teams throughout the year. So people are busy. In general, that'll help reduce injury risk. Okay. So I never give people absolutes, but in general, if we can stick to one sport, less than number of hours a week as compared to the age. So a 16-year-old, less than 16 hours per week, it is going to help reduce that injury risk. If you think about it, if you go and play other sports, you're using your body in different ways. So you're not having the same repetitive load on one area over and over again. Okay, but I put more than one principle up there when we talked about managing sports specialization. And so all of those things are just to help reduce injury risk overall. I'm not saying you can't play in your sport more than that many hours per week, but it will help reduce your injury risk. So especially if you're having recurrent injuries over and over again, that's something really important to think about. And then I'll answer this one, and then I will pass it off to Laura to answer a couple more nutrition ones. So any advice on footwear, supports, etc. for a player with recurring mild ankle pain? I would say go into your physician, because it really depends on what your foot looks like. So some people pronate, meaning they roll in. Some people have low arches, and we do recommend orthotics, but I wouldn't recommend an orthotic to everyone if you have a neutral foot. And so you can go into your physician and get in and have them look at that, and we can give you a recommendation. If you're having recurrent ankle sprains, a lace-up ankle brace is really good. So I would recommend that if you are having recurrent ankle sprains. There's lots of literature that shows that helps prevent recurrent ankle sprains when you're coming back from injury. So kind of two different things there. And then Laura, I'll let you take one or two, and I think there's one more for me.
Yep, I'm sitting here sending a few. So is almond butter better than peanut butter? I mean, marginal differences in the health benefits of like an almond versus a peanut. But as far as protein, they're very comparable. I think it comes down to a taste preference, to be honest with you. I recommend both of them. I just personally prefer peanut butter, as you learned, but the almond butter is fine. Again, like an almond has perhaps a bit more the, excuse me, hard, healthy fat, but again, I wouldn't say it makes or breaks the decision. I think either one is fine. Is it okay? So with the breakfast, an English muffin with butter, think about what I went through before. That's fine, but for part of it, you're lacking, you want some protein. So I would, if you do, again, here I go with eggs, but like, if you do like an egg, maybe you don't, but that's smart. But I would think about you need a protein source. And remember, you want to try to get closer to that 20 grams of protein at that meal. So a yogurt, egg, a nut butter, again, a drinkable yogurt, something like that, but definitely going to be too light, and that's not going to hold you long enough. So I would definitely boost that up. Yeah. Okay.
All right. And then last question here about hyperflexible athletes. Great question. We see hyperflexible athletes all the time, and it's really challenging. So I always talk about, there's this spectrum of people who have really tight joints and have to work really hard on flexibility. And then there's this whole spectrum to hyperflexible athletes. So meaning flexibility of their joints usually. And it's really important to note that flexibility of your joints is truly different than people who are flexible, right? So flexibility is of your muscles and tendons, and it's really a joint laxity is what we're talking about. So I'm not sure if this is more about joint laxity or truly someone who has a lot of flexibility, but we do consider those two different things. In general, if we're talking about someone who's hypermobile, who falls in that joint laxity category, which I presume is what you're talking about. Lots of strength training, stability training, and then sometimes they do also need to work on flexibility of certain areas of their body, because again, joint laxity, how mobile your joints are, is different than flexibility. And so truly a lot of times those patients that we see who are having recurrent injuries because they're hypermobile, it's about keeping up that physical therapy program, right? So you get injured, you get some really good exercises, you got to keep those up. That just has to become part of your regimen where you're doing them 2 or 3 days per week. And the other piece you could consider is working with like a trained strength and conditioning coach. At Boston Children's Hospital, we have the McKaylee Center. And those are individuals trained on doing motion screens with you and helping to create a program that's a safe program, that's supervised, that you can then do at home to stay safe. And it's really about just keeping up that conditioning. So great question. And I think that's it. Thank you guys for your excellent questions. Oh, one more.
Yes, thank you.
Should kids be lifting weights? That's a great question. We always get that one. So weight training is safe for kids. There's no downsides to that. It is fine to lift weights. My one caveat is that you truly got to have someone supervising who knows what they're doing. Okay. There's all sorts of athletic programs out there that I've seen that are truly not safe. My background before I got into medicine was actually kinesiology or sports science, and I was trained as a personal trainer. Okay. There's really good people out there, and there's really great, not great people out there, unfortunately. And so talk to your physician, talk to your coaches, make sure you have someone that we all trust who's supervising that weightlifting, because we want to make sure they're weightlifting in a safe manner and not doing things that are beyond what I often see is people are lifting too heavy or using too much momentum. Weightlifting is really about being slow and controlled. And so if they're weightlifting appropriately, certainly it's a safe thing to do. And we would advocate that our athletes do that.
Okay, so I think that is all. For everyone that is still on, we have recorded this webinar, so we'll be available on our website at the end of the week, and we'll also be sending it out through some email marketing as well. I do want to just thank you both for joining us, and if you guys have any questions, I can also send me an email and I can direct you to Dr. Schley or Laura. So I do want to thank you everyone again, and that's a wrap.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone.